This video is on Hyflex learning. So let's start out this video by being clear about some different terminologies. At Lycoming College, we are used to face-to-face instruction. True face-to-face instruction is entirely in person. In the second half of the spring semester, we were forced to go entirely online, so the classes were entirely delivered online. There are two terms that cover a combination of the two. Hybrid classes have some materials in class and online, but each of those is the same for all students, as opposed to Hyflex courses where students can choose to be in the classroom or taking the class online. So what is Hyflex? Hyflex stands for hybrid flexibility. The term was coined by Dr. Brian Beatty in San Francisco, and this format supports in-person and online students in the same class. So this was developed to allow students to choose the modality of their class, and students could choose on any given day whether they were going to participate online or participate in person. This is a little different than what we will be experiencing this semester, when it will not be students' choice rather than their health and quarantining rules that will determine whether or not they are allowed to be in the classroom. So at first, Hyflex sounds like it is 2 classes in one, but it's actually 3, depending on how you decide to design your course and what you offer your students. The first is the face-to-face option, in which the class won't look all that different than it has in the past other than social distancing. Then there is the option for online synchronous, where students can participate when not physically present, but in real time. And then there's the option of online asynchronous, where students can watch online lectures and videos and participate physically distanced and temporally distanced. So according to the founder of Hyflex Learning, there are 4 core values of Hyflex Learning. The first is learner choice, and this is the point that I made earlier, that normally Hyflex Learning is designed for students to choose which modality works best for them. This isn't particularly relevant to us, as students' choice will not be part of the equation. Equivalency is a really important point to discuss. Students who are in the class or online need to have equivalent learning experiences. That does not mean that they have to be identical, because that is not necessarily possible. However, the activities offered in each modality need to lead to the same learning goals. Reusability is an important point as well. It may or may not apply to us, as we don't know what future semesters will look like. But as you're creating online environments and as you're designing your classes, consider what learning objects may be able to be reused in the future. And that may not just be if we are still online or Hyflex in the spring, but it may be looking at how to make your class more hybrid in offering some of the activities as online activities, even if it's an in-person course. And the last value is keeping accessibility in mind. I have recorded a short video for how to get started with accessibility in online classes. It is important to make sure that whatever you offer online and in person is fully accessible by students with disabilities, or perhaps students whose first language is not English. So because of that value of equivalency that I emphasized in the last slide, it is important to talk about backward design a little bit. Backwards design is from the book Understanding by Design, which we have in print at the Snowden Library by Wiggins and McTeague. This is a classic text of instructional design. It's a very useful concept for instructors to understand, regardless of the modality in which they are working. So in backwards design, the first thing that the instructor decides is, what are the desired results? What do you want students to know or be able to do at the end of instruction? This may be at the end of the class or at the end of a particular unit. The second step is determine acceptable evidence. So how are you going to assess them? And only then, when you've come up with those first 2 steps, start planning learning experiences and instruction and figure out how you're going to get to those desired results. So in designing for Hyflex, there are 3 considerations. The first is content. How are you going to deliver the content of the course? Some of this may not matter between the modalities. If you lecture, then it is not difficult for you to record that lecture and provide it to students in either real time or asynchronous learning. Other than for participation, assessment of students may also not be all that different between the modalities. I see the hardest part of having this Hyflex course is the activities. What do you want students to do, and how are you going to make sure they did it well in 3 different modalities? So it's those activities that differ the most between the online and in-person. Those activities may be different between the online synchronous students and the online asynchronous students. Brian Beatty wrote an online textbook that he provides for free, and the link for that will be provided below this video. And in that, he includes several worksheets that you could print out and use in your course design. You do not necessarily have to read the entire textbook, but there is one chapter for designing a Hyflex course and one chapter that discusses the teacher's experience of a Hyflex course, and both of those are worth reading. So I began to play a little bit with how I would take a particular lesson plan from my first year seminar and move it into a Hyflex course. Much of the information I have found on Hyflex courses doesn't necessarily explain how you do this. Hopefully my example, which of course I have never actually implemented, gives you some ideas of how you could do this in your own course. So this is my Moodle class for the course, and as it's not a course that I'm actually going to deliver, some of this may look pretty sparse, but hopefully you can kind of see where I would be going if I were doing this every day. Today I'm just going to show you one particular lesson plan. So week 3, I would ask students to read chapters 4 through 6 of Dracula and bring a few colored pens or pencils to class. So I decided to use a page in Moodle to outline the class, and I think I would do this for every class. So if I click on this, you see the class outline. So I would start the class, like every class, with some announcements asking how are students doing with the class and in general, particularly because this is early in a first year seminar, and any upcoming announcements. Then I planned to spend half of the class on time and stress management and half on new characters. So the introduction to time and stress management I could provide myself as a very short lecture. Then I would open up the handout for time and stress management. In the past I've given this as a handout, and now I would have to decide if I'm giving the in-person students a physical handout or just having them read this off the screen. So I would have the students who are in person take turns reading each of these sections out to the class. So one section per student. Having them read it should keep them more engaged if they don't know when they will be called on, and helps build community. At the end of this document, I have an activity outlined. So in the activity, I ask them to create a calendar of their week. Then I ask them to create a to-do list of the things they need to accomplish this week in that discretionary time, so that they realize their quote-unquote discretionary time still carries a lot of responsibilities. So for the in-person students, I could walk around to some degree with physical distancing and interact with students based on their maps. Then we would move on to talking about where we are in Dracula. In chapter 5 and 6 of Dracula, we meet a lot of the new characters. And it's important to understand those characters and the characteristics of each of those characters in order to understand the rest of the story. So with the students who are in the classroom, I would go through each of the new characters and make sure that they understand what class and gender and jobs each one of them has. We could crowdsource that, and I could write it on the board or record it on the computer and be able to post it online. Then I have a game called Snake Oil that I have played in the past. Snake Oil is a commercial card-based party game that I have found to be very useful in a number of educational activities. In it, there are buyer cards where one player will be a buyer, such as a senior citizen or a beach bum, and the rest of the players in a particular group will get these other cards that have words on them, and of the 5 or 6 cards that they have to pick 2 to create an imaginary product and pitch it to the buyer based on that buyer's identity within the game. I have found this is useful for teaching students persuasion and audience in public speaking, but I found that in my first year seminar, I can replace those buyer cards with the characters from Dracula that we have recently met, and so they have to understand the characters as they pitch their imaginary product to them. So for example, if the 2 cards that I decided to use were Tooth Magnet, I could say that, well, based on what I know about Dracula, you are going to have a vampire after you, and that vampire has fangs. So if you had a tooth magnet with you at all times, it would pull out the fangs of any vampire around you, and they would then not be able to harm you. Anytime that I have played this game in any of the classes I have used it in, it is a very popular game. We play a sample round as the game was designed to be played, and then I have students switch out those buyer identity cards that came with the game with cards that represent the characters they're supposed to be learning about. And the last time I taught this class, those 2 activities took up the entire class. So that is what we would do with the in-person students. So for synchronous students, while I made the stress management activity a little more active in the content area by having students read that, it's still a lecture, and synchronous students could listen online quite easily. If the sound quality was decent enough, we could have students who are synchronous and online read some of those as well. Any discussions they could participate with through the chat. They could complete the calendar assignment and send that to me in real time. And so to make the card game possible through distance, I programmed a very simple page that provides the buyer identity. In this version, it has the original card buyer identities. I would replace those with the characters from Dracula if I were really going to use this. And then it gives 5 words that would appear on those cards below that as seller cards. And each time that I hit refresh, it will pull out a random combination of 5 of those words. So students could play this over Teams. If each of them had the URL, it would be very similar to them being dealt a random deck of cards. So exactly how this would work would depend on how many students are remote and synchronous. Students can play this either with other students who are also under quarantine or not able to be on campus, or if there are only 1 or 2 students in that situation, a student with a laptop in the class could include them in an in-person group. So for this particular lesson plan, the remote and the online synchronous don't have to be all that different. But some of these activities work less well for the asynchronous students. So those may be students who are away for athletic events, or perhaps at a doctor's appointment, or perhaps were not able to come to campus and may have to work or have some other obligation at the time of class. So for asynchronous students, they have directions at the bottom of the page that direct them to watch the recorded class, which I would need to upload when the class was over. They would need to download the calendar file and complete the calendar activity. I would ask them to write a brief reflective paragraph on 2 of the time and stress management suggestions to show that they had processed those. And I give them some suggestions for how they could reflect on those. I would have them write out their sales pitches for 3 of the new characters using that remote online snake oil page, which would accomplish the same learning activities. They just wouldn't have the same game experience. And then I would ask them to send the calendar activity, the reflective paragraphs, and the sales pitches to me by some reasonable date, taking into consideration that it may take me a few hours after the class ends to get the recording up in Moodle. So hopefully that helps you kind of get an idea of some of the things that you could do. This particular lesson plan didn't take me all that long to come up with, but I don't know how that would work with my other lesson plans, particularly because my first year seminar was humanities based and had a lot of discussion and interactivity, which does make it harder to create a Hyflex course. So I will link to some particularly useful resources below this video. There are some other resources available under the web resources tab of this guide. I do suggest reading Brian Beattie's Hybrid Flexible Course Design, which is available for free online. If you're interested in more information about Wiggins and McTeague's Understanding by Design, that is available in print at the Snowden Library. And also the very short video by Mary Dixon has been useful to me to understand what a Hyflex lesson plan would actually look like. So that is the end of this video, and thank you for watching.